Have mapped every corner of the globe. We've explored jungles and deserts, probed space. Yet we've gone only 7 miles below the Earth's surface, just 1/500th of the way to the core. Now we're about to go deeper. We're taking a trip to the heart of our planet to seek out the last frontier, where trees force their way through rock to find water, where strange life forms inhabit deadly environments, where skyscrapers are built on sand, mines are the size of cities, and massive forces continue to shape the Earth. We'll join scientists, engineers, and adventurers as they investigate, explore, and challenge the mysteries that lie below. On a journey to the Earth's core. Getting to the Earth's core requires a 4,000-mile trip through 3 distinct underground layers. The first is the Earth's crust, a fragile surface layer just 20 miles deep.
Imagine that the Earth was a hard-boiled egg. In fact, the continents are about 3 times thinner proportionally than this eggshell, and the ocean crust is about 10 times thinner.
The crust packs a lot into its relatively shallow depth, overlapping zones of coal, water, salt, gold, silver, oil.
The interesting thing for those of us living at the surface of the Earth is that if you don't grow something, you mine it. And so much of our world comes from underground in a variety of ways.
Beneath the crust lies a thicker layer, the mantle, turbulent molten rock, 1,800 miles deep.
Underneath this planet is this intense, roiling region of hot rock, incredible temperatures and pressures.
At over 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the mantle is constantly churning, fracturing the crust above it into giant slabs called tectonic plates.
The plates operate in a way that shapes the land unlike any other planet.
Moving just inches a year, the plates grind together or pull apart with spectacular results.
We have volcanoes erupting at the surface, we have earthquakes, and yet we manage to survive in a very delicate balance.
Incredibly, volcanoes are a source of wealth and fertility.
It's volcanoes that deliver nutrients and fresh material to Earth's surface. So that's where we get nice fresh soils. It's where our mineral resources form, how they form.
1,800 miles down in the outer core, molten iron holds the key to our survival. A planet-wide magnetic field that protects us from solar radiation.
We really need the Earth's magnetic field because of the intense violence of our sun.
Ultimately, we reach the inner core, Earth's most deadly natural environment.
By the time you get to the center of the Earth, the pressure is 3.6 million times that at the surface. It's enough to take one of these granite boulders and squeeze them into half their volume.
Our incredible journey begins only inches beneath our feet. If we peel back the Earth's topmost layer, we find a world of insects, none more widespread than the ant.
This could be a rather large nest.
Ants have built countless nests under the surface of every continent except Antarctica.
You can see that there are ants pouring out the top of it, some of them carrying larvae, it looks like.
Ants have been around 120 million years. They predate dinosaurs like T-Rex. They shared the Earth with Stegosaurus and Triceratops. They outnumber humans 140,000 to 1.
I don't know of another social insect that's as widespread. It's a society that extends over huge portions of the Earth's terrestrial environment.
Ants are fast. Their speed is equivalent to a human running 40 miles per hour. And they're strong. They can lift 20 times their own weight. That's like an adult male lifting a car. But what they do most is build nests, a task that, surprisingly, is crucial to humans. The nests help air and water penetrate the soil, keeping it fresh and fertile. Beneath the ant zone, 6 feet down. London, England. 6 feet below these busy streets lie the veins and arteries that deliver the necessities of modern life. 28,000 miles of gas mains, 19,000 miles of electric cable, 40,000 miles of sewers, and the final resting place for millions. 6 feet under. It's a common phrase for dead and buried. But where did it come from? Its history can be traced to London in 1665. The city was suffering an epidemic of bubonic plague. At its height, the death toll reached over 7,000 per week.
The Lord Mayor of London tried to stop the spread of infection, and he ordered that graves of plague victims were at least 6 feet underground.
It was believed the dead could infect healthy people, so burying bodies 6 feet under seemed deep enough to contain the disease. Later, people learned that plague actually transmits through the fleas carried by black rats. Ultimately, the 1665 outbreak claimed nearly 72,000 lives, 1 in 6 of London's population. Only when the Great Fire of London, the following year, all but wiped out the rats, was the city spared. But the tradition of how deep a burial should be has now spread around the world. Moving deeper, another small step on our journey to the core. 16 feet down, there is only one creature that can live this far underground. These tunnels are home to the prairie dog, the world's deepest burrowing animal, an animal that has a surprising impact on our ecosystem. Adult prairie dogs are only a foot long and weigh about 3 pounds, but underground, they're literally earth-moving machines.
They'll do it by pushing the dirt with their hands, or kicking the dirt with their legs, or the most amusing part also is they'll use their head like a jackhammer.
A burrow can be up to 16 feet deep and over 100 yards long.
That's more than a football field.
They're also incredibly complex. The design incorporates a sophisticated air conditioning system. 2 entrances at different heights create a partial vacuum that pulls in air at the lower entrance and pushes it out the higher.
So that is a very complicated burrow system, and I don't think any other animal has been shown to have a burrow system that complicated.
These little creatures have a surprising importance to other animals.
Many other animals depend on prairie dogs for their survival. For example, these burrows have a significant impact on the way water and nutrients are cycled through the grassland ecosystem. The grass that's there is more nutritious.
Grasslands benefit from the prairie dog's presence. Their digging brings air to the soil, and their droppings help fertilize it. In the 1800s, there were 400 million prairie dogs, but farmers saw them as vermin and shot or poisoned them. Today, they number under 100 million. Bad news for the areas where they live.
They're not really part of the grassland ecosystem the way they used to be 200 years ago, because we just don't have sufficient numbers so that they can really be there and have the impact that we need, so that the burrowing owls will come, so that the bison will come and feed there, so the salamanders will know about it. And so in one sense they're not endangered, but the grassland ecosystem as it should be and as we knew it 150 years ago is endangered.
The next stop on our journey to the core is 50 feet down. Here, in many places across the world, higher life forms disappear. Soil gives way to rock. We begin to encounter coal. Coal was formed around 300 million years ago. It was a one-time process. The climate was hotter and wetter than today. A giant swampland dominated the Earth's equatorial regions. As fallen trees and vegetation rotted in the boggy soil, overlying sediments compressed it into rock. Today, coal generates a third of the world's electricity. 7 billion tons a year are produced globally. The biggest coal fields lie in China, Russia, and the US. The state of Pennsylvania alone produces 1% of the world's supply. Centralia, Pennsylvania was once a town of 1,500 people.
It was an idyllic small town community. You could walk from one end to the other and know everybody in town, and that's a nice way to live.
Today, it's a ghost town, all because of a freak accident. In 1962, a garbage fire was purposely started in a landfill on the edge of the town's cemetery.
They wanted to clean up the town dump, and they lit the dump on fire, and it spread through an opening in that pit into this labyrinth of deep mines, old abandoned deep coal mines that underlay Centralia.
Reaching a depth of around 50 feet, the fire eventually covered some 450 acres, the size of Lower Manhattan, and it hasn't stopped yet. What fuels the fire is anthracite coal, carbon-rich, a slow burner.
If you look at the orientation of the rock, the bedrock, you'll notice that it is dipping in this fashion, indicating that it's trending down into a synclinal valley. And in the anthracite coal region, most of your coals are found in the valley.
Burning at 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, the melting point of aluminum, the fire ate away at soil and rock until there were no foundations left. Today, what was once Locust Avenue, Centralia's main street, is just a stretch of rural highway. It's hard to imagine that this was once the center of town.
What we have here is a photograph of what Centralia used to look like, standing on the spot where we are now. We're standing where John Coddington had his gas station, and looking across toward that dead tree there, which is the same tree that's in the picture. And the streets here were packed with houses. There were just, it was just one house next to another. Now they're all gone. They're all, the nature is reclaiming it, and there just really isn't, much left of the way the town used to look.
This house on Locust Avenue, across the street from the gas station, belonged to Bob Gadinsky.
In 1977, it was a single house that my wife and I absolutely loved. And it was in a community that was a very close-knit community. But as you can see today, it is nothing more than an overgrown jungle.
As years passed, the fire grew stronger, bolder, scorching the landscape, charring trees, all from below. Besides the heat and smoke, the fire emitted noxious gas, as it still does today.
Carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and sulfur dioxide gas. So it's not advisable to put your mouth right over it, okay, because of the gases that are present.
When the streets began to disintegrate, the federal government stepped in. In 1984, Congress funded a voluntary evacuation. Most of Centralia's citizens moved out, never to return.
There was a lot of concern living on top of a disaster. There was a feeling of being trapped, and I was concerned about the safety of the kids, so I looked to leave as quickly as I could.
The underground fire had won. From 50 to 500 feet down, by now soil has given way to bedrock. This is the construction zone, the layer where most of the world's great building projects take shape. Like subways, there are 52 underground rail systems in the world. The most extensive is in Shanghai, China. 262 miles of tracks, 34 miles longer than New York City. But the deepest subway tunnel is in St. Petersburg, Russia, 340 feet down, about the height of the Statue of Liberty. Traditionally, tunnels were dug like this, or this. Now they use this, the tunnel boring machine, also known as the TBM. TBMs were first used in 1956 to dig the Humber River Sewer Tunnel in Toronto. The machine is 400 feet long. Its cutting head, measuring up to 50 feet in diameter, spins 3 times a minute to slice through the rock. Laser guidance keeps it on track. As TBMs move forward, they install steel rings and concrete lining slabs. Like mobile factories, they cut raw rock in front and leave a finished tunnel behind. The TBM is the secret behind some of the world's megatunnels, like the Gotthard Base Tunnel that links Switzerland and Italy through Europe's tallest mountain range, the Alps. At its deepest, Gotthard is buried 8,000 feet beneath the mountain peaks. Stretching 36 miles, it's the longest rail tunnel in the world. Construction began in 1996. Ultimately, 4 TBMs drilled 2 parallel tunnels simultaneously from either end, through 24 million tons of rock. It took 14 years, but in October 2010, the final breakthrough was made. Previously, trucks took 4 hours to get from Zurich, Switzerland to Milan, Italy. The tunnel cuts that travel time by 90 minutes. Bedrock may be the bane of engineers who need to drive through it to build a tunnel, but that same rock is needed as a foundation for the world's tallest buildings. New York City, home of the world's oldest and most famous skyscrapers. To keep these monster buildings standing, engineers anchored foundations to the bedrock, laid down a platform, and built on top. In fact, Manhattan's skyline mirrors the bedrock layer beneath. The anchor method underpins most skyscrapers, including the world's tallest building. The Dubai Burj Khalifa stands 2,700 feet tall, with foundations 164 feet deep. But if there is no bedrock, can a skyscraper be built at all? It's a challenge engineers faced on the next stop in our journey, 375 feet down, beneath one of the world's tallest buildings, the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Incredibly, these massive concrete and glass towers stand not on bedrock, but on sand.
Never build houses on sand. Well, we proved that you can build houses on sand with the right engineering techniques.
Construction began in 1996. The 2 buildings were planned at 88 stories, 1,500 feet tall. Each would weigh nearly 300,000 tons. At first, the idea had been to set the foundations into bedrock. But surveyors discovered the rock below the construction site curved steeply downward, like an underground cliff, nearly 600 feet. If they continued, the towers would rest half on and half off the top of the cliff. An invitation to disaster.
If we were to maintain our original position, we don't have a tower, the tower will fall.
The construction site was in a confined area downtown. There was no room to build the towers entirely on the bedrock. So they opted instead to move them away from the bedrock altogether. But that would mean sinking the foundations through soft soil into a layer of sand. The foundations would be held in place by friction, the same force that keeps a nail hammered into wood.
The nail will be rooted in this piece of wood, just the same as this frictional powers are now nailed into this whole zone of soil beneath this whole tower.
The construction team got to work. Under each tower, they sank 104 piles, each 10 feet apart, a virtual forest of concrete and steel. Some of the piles went down nearly 375 feet. In 2011, they're the deepest foundations of any building in the world. Underground engineering had achieved the impossible. 2 1,500 feet towers built on sand. Engineers have long used geology to guide them in their work. But geology can be unpredictable. The very term bedrock sounds like it should be tough. But that's not always the case. While bedrock can be incredibly old,
this rock's 1.6 billion years old.
It's also vulnerable to a very simple element: rainwater. Over billions of years, rainwater trickling through bedrock causes it to deform and crack.
These fractures can be enormous. Here's a huge one that extends all the length of this boulder.
Ultimately, water hollows out caverns, where it can eventually collect into vast underground lakes and rivers. Deeper still, it saturates the rock like a sponge.
In fact, there may be 5 to 10 oceanfuls of water deep within the rock of the Earth as well.
99% of the world's liquid fresh water lies underground. The largest reserves are in China, Russia, Africa, and the United States. The Ogallala Aquifer is the biggest in the U.S., stretching from Nebraska to Texas. It covers 174,000 square miles, an area the size of Sweden, and reaches depths of around 500 feet. But in many places around the world, groundwater is drying up, and that means people, animals, and plants have to go deeper to get what's left. Next on our underground journey, the world's deepest tree root, 400 feet down. Mpumalanga, South Africa. On a cliff above Echo Caves stands a grove of 150-year-old fig trees. These have survived a dual challenge, growing in rock with no apparent source of water.
When you look at this, it looks like it's something out of Lord of the Rings.
Roots and rocks don't normally mix. Trees usually thrive in fertile soil, yet the climate here is arid. For half the year, there's no rain at all. The fig trees need up to 6 gallons a day to survive, and they'll even split rock to get it. Tree roots are genetically programmed to know that water lies beneath them. The tip of the root secretes a kind of lubricant called mucilage to soften the root's path. As it grows, the root probes the rock for cracks and weak spots. Fig trees rely mainly on a single taproot to find water. This one goes deep. The question is, how deep?
Well, here we go, sliding down into the depths of the earth.
The further down, the tougher it gets.
Isn't it amazing what Mother Nature does just in the search of water?
Yet the fig root proves elusive.
Let's hope we're going to find something a bit further on.
Finally, Burroughs spots something.
Oh, wow. At last. 120 feet down, and here's the first sign of a real fig root.
It takes the root 70 years to penetrate this deep. Once it finds moisture, its journey ends. When the root bottoms out, the depth is nearly 400 feet.
We are now at the deepest known roots in the world. There is water as we talk. There's water pumping back up under my hand here, back up into the tree.
All the way to the surface. Past underground mammals, man-made tunnels, and the deepest tree roots, into the mineral zone. Minerals are what rock is made of. People have mined the Earth's mineral wealth for over 40,000 years. But what do you do with a mine that's reached the end of its useful life? Something pretty unexpected, as the next stop on our descent to the core reveals. Sala, Sweden, 500 feet down. Since 2006, a former silver mine has been home to the world's deepest hotel suite. Furnished in silver with an exclusive dining area, the nearest bathroom is, however, on the surface, and the ambient temperature a chilly 40 degrees. The silver mine that houses the room was closed in 1908. For 400 years, miners had dug out some 40,000 tons of rock, mostly by hand.
In the 16th century, this was the most important mine in Sweden.
Today, the miner's legacy is seen in the tunnels and caverns that stretch into the darkness for 12.5 miles. A growing tourist interest in the mine sparked the hotel suite idea.
People come here just to get a glimpse of the past.
Silver dates back 4.6 billion years to the origin of the solar system. It was formed from drifting mineral particles thrown into space by exploding stars. captured in the swirling dust of the embryonic planets, fused into pure nuggets by underground heat and water. Today, silver is mined in Australia, China, Europe, and the Americas, a total of some 20,000 tons a year. In Sala, the water that once helped to create the mine's silver is still here.
Half the mine is filled with water.
While the mine was still working, pumps kept the percolating rainwater at bay, but no longer. This flooded mine shaft holds an estimated 1.3 million gallons, enough to fill around 25,000 bathtubs. Marco and Tatia Ranisto have booked the underground hotel suite to celebrate their 15th wedding anniversary.
Okay.
The idea was Tatia's.
Perfect. Well, I want to give him a big surprise and something special.
The elevator takes 4.5 minutes, at a rate of 2 feet per second, to reach the suite 500 feet below. Marco is having doubts.
I am nervous. Down in the ground, alone. No, almost alone.
I'm there.
The Ranistos arrive at their destination.
Wow. I can see it. Yeah, it's amazing.
As the couple sits down to dinner, Marco is still a little apprehensive.
Wait, now I just have the courage to sleep in.
But in the end, he does manage to spend the night. A night to remember. Groundwater is the biggest agent for change underground. It not only reacts chemically with minerals to create metals like silver, it can literally melt rock. Guatemala City, 2010. A sudden rumble, falling masonry. When the dust clears, all that remains is a giant hole, 100 feet deep and 66 feet wide. An entire city block has disappeared. Guatemala City is built on porous limestone. Underground water flow can dissolve the rock, leaving only a fragile surface layer that can give way without warning. Incredibly, the collapse only claimed one life, but it was the second major sinkhole in the city in 3 years. Sinkholes are terrifying and sometimes deadly, but some can yield an enormous amount of scientific data. The next stop in our underground journey is also in Latin America, 1,100 feet down. Zacatón, Mexico. This water-filled sinkhole is no place for life. Beneath the placid surface, there's no air. But one life form thrives here, microbes, and they're pretty strange.
So all of the bacteria and biomats have to survive in an anaerobic environment, which leads to unusual forms of life.
In 2006, NASA sent a team to study Zacatón's microbes. The first step was to figure out the sinkhole's interior layout.
We really didn't know how big it was, how deep it was. It was up against the great unknown.
So they came up with new technology, an egg-shaped robot designed to go where other probes couldn't. They dubbed it Depth X.
It has thrusters in all directions, so it can go up, down, left, right, it can spin, it can make any motion it needs to in order to find its way through a three-dimensional environment.
Depth X is 6.5 feet across and 5 feet deep, about the size of a quad bike. What makes it special is that it's not remote controlled. It steers entirely by itself.
As soon as it descends below the surface, it's completely on its own. And during that period of time, it has to make all of its decisions for itself.
To see, the robot relies on sonar, a technology first developed in the early 1900s to bounce high-energy sound waves off the sinkhole walls and floor. Like a bat navigating a dark cave, the robot created a continually updated 3D map in its memory. Depth X's ability to think for itself was a first in robotic engineering.
Whether it's mapping or choosing to collect a sample or retreating back to the surface, all of that has to happen on its own.
After making 50 dives, DepthX knew every nook and cranny.
People get lost in caves and you don't know whether you're at the second or the third intersection. Well, a robot like DepthX does a very good job at distinguishing those confusing situations, in some cases even better than people can do.
Before long, Zacuton was giving up its secrets.
We know that it's warm, perhaps there are hot springs that are feeding the Zacuton.
But the biggest surprise, scientists discovered 100 types of bacteria, including 6 new species of a microbe called archaea that have a decidedly alien lifestyle, like living off sulfur.
One of the archaea actually had sulfur within the organism, so it was metabolizing sulfur from the water and using that as an energy source.
The discovery confirms life doesn't need Earth-like conditions to thrive. One day, a descendant of DepthX may find itself taking a trip into space.
We will see these explorers going forward and going to the places where people can't go.
To somewhere like Jupiter's moon, Europa, on a hunt for similar life on another world. Latin America and Mexico in particular is dotted with sinkholes. And just one province, Yucatan, is home to more than 3,000 of them. Some are filled with water, some not. But none can compare to the next stop on our journey. The deepest vertical shaft in the world, the Cave of Swallows. For a certain breed of parachutist, the cave presents a unique challenge.
And you step to that edge, and you look down, and as you're going yourself, you just hear this rush of air.
1,400 feet deep, 125 feet across at the top, widening out to 6 acres at the bottom. The shaft has the same dimensions as the Empire State Building. The Cave of Swallows gets its name from the birds that nest along its upper walls. Millions of them spiral out of the entrance at daybreak and return at dusk. But what the birds find easy is tough with a parachute. Positioning and timing are everything. Underground, the jumpers risk getting disoriented.
When you jump underground, there are walls surrounding you. You will always face a wall.
A jumper has 6.5 seconds to pull the ripcord. Do it too late, and there's no time for the chute to deploy. The drop rate is 120 feet per second. At this speed, hitting the ground is like a car going headlong into a brick wall at 80 miles per hour. And when it's time to go back up,
we clip ourselves into an extraction rope, which is attached to a winch, and we can get 2 base jumpers out in about 10 minutes. And then we do it all again.
Moving down through the Earth's core, we are on a hunt for minerals. Our next stop, the world's largest salt mine in Ontario, Canada. The Sifto Mine, 1,800 feet underground. Salt is a kind of rock made up of sodium and chlorine. It's all that's left from ancient oceans that once covered the Earth, but because of climate change, evaporated away. An average adult needs to consume a teaspoon a day or risk disease, coma, even death. So it's not surprising that the earliest salt mines opened some 14,000 years ago in what is today Austria. Across the world, miners extract 260 million tons a year. The biggest deposits lie in China, Russia, and Canada. The Sifto mine opened in 1959. It lies over 1/3 of a mile beneath the town of Goderich, Ontario, and stretches out under nearby Lake Huron. Most mines consist of smaller tunnels held up by beams and pillars called props. Sifto is more like an underground city. Its sprawling caverns cover over 3 square miles, about the size of Midtown Manhattan. It even has its own shops and offices. A drop in ceiling height tells miners they're getting close to the action, where these giant chainsaws get to work.
We mine these tunnels that are 12 foot high, 60 foot wide.
Blades 10 feet long bite into rock, the saw blades turning at 1,500 times a minute. The air is thick with dust. The noise is overpowering, but it's about to get a lot noisier.
They'll drill down and we'll blast headings that are 60 foot wide, 60 foot high, which are huge caverns.
Giant trucks move the newly cut rock back through the mine and deliver it into the jaws of a hungry crusher. The trucks unload at a rate of 10 times per hour, around the clock, 7 days a week. In the 4 minutes it takes this monster to get through a load, quarter-ton slabs are reduced to coarse grains. Conveyors speed the salt to the surge bin.
Just a big tank that actually feeds the salt into the buckets that go up and down, and we're feeding the salt out. But this huge tank is a big benefit to it.
The surge bin means all the processing can be done underground.
We're looking at rates at 24,000 to 26,000 tons hoisted per day, and we're capable of even more than that.
Every day, this one mine produces enough salt for half the world's population. And Sifto believes it can keep this output going for another 250 years. Our next story takes us 600 feet deeper than the Sifto mine, to another salt mine in Sondershausen, Germany. This mine plays host to a strange athletic event, the world's deepest marathon.
Running under the ground, a crazy people.
Running a marathon underground is a very different experience to running on the surface.
You don't feel free like in the forest. You can feel the wind and everything, but not underground.
Conditions are extreme. Take temperature, for example. For every 60 feet you go down into the crust, the temperature rises 1 degree. The reason why dates back 4.6 billion years to Earth's origin. The mix of spiraling gases and particles that formed the planet included radioactive cosmic dust. Once compressed into rock, it released its radioactive energy as heat, and still does. Working in such conditions can be tough. Running can be even harder. At a depth of 2,400 feet, our underground runners are coping with 80-degree heat.
It's so hot. It's near to the hell.
40% humidity.
There isn't very good air down here, so I think that's the heaviest problem.
And a tough course. The race is run over an uneven circuit that rises and falls 700 feet with each lap.
When you fall down here, you can get bad injuries.
At an average marathon pace, the foot spends 0.2 of a second on the ground. With fatigue, the foot stays on the ground longer. In the mine, the longer the contact, the greater the risk.
Oh, can you see this? It's so slippery. What we need in our trainers, a good profile. Like, this is a bit profile, but I think it could be more.
I think you chose the spikes with nails.
Under it.
Inevitably, the treacherous ground claims a victim. It's a mystery why runners would risk such dangerous conditions. But if you ask them, they'll all say the same thing.
It's the kick. It's the hardest on world, I think. Who can say I have run a marathon 2,000 feet under the earth?
After spending half a day underground, the runners are free to return to the surface. The steamy temperature, dry air, and tough conditions, only temporary. But for 33 Chilean copper miners in 2010, getting out wasn't so easy. A tunnel roof collapse trapped them at 2,400 feet, the same depth as the Marathon. The miners endured 80-degree heat, air thick with rock dust, darkness and isolation. They weren't even sure they'd ever get out. The rescue shaft had to be cut through a hard volcanic rock called basalt, notorious for sudden slippage. Fearing they'd provoke another rockfall, teams from all over the world used the latest technology to dig a rescue shaft. It was a slow process. After 69 days, all 33 miners were rescued. It was one of the greatest mine rescues of all time. We're now approaching the deepest places that humans have been. This is the world's deepest scientific laboratory.
It's very busy down here.
The Sudbury Neutrino Observatory, or SNO Lab, is 1.25 miles below central Ontario.
2 experiments are running. 1 experiment is in the final stage of commissioning. 3 large experiments are under construction right now.
The scientists here are searching for something that can only be seen 6,800 feet underground. Tiny particles of cosmic matter called neutrinos. So small that 200 septillion of them would fit onto a grain of sand. That's 200 with 24 zeros. Not surprisingly, neutrinos are flimsy.
They are incredibly light particles and will typically pass through the Earth, just not even noticing it's there.
Scientists detected neutrinos back in 1956. They're everywhere in the universe. To spot something so small, you need to filter out the gamma rays, X-rays, and ultraviolet radiation that continually bombard the Earth from space.
You want to prove that it's not conventional radiation somehow interfering and mimicking the signal you expect, so you need lots and lots of shielding.
And that's why the lab is so deep underground.
These cosmic rays would make a sensitive neutrino measurement absolutely undoable. 6,800 feet of rock here in our Sudbury lab reduces the number of cosmic rays by a factor of about 10 million.
To find something as small as neutrinos requires some big hardware.
If you're looking for a particle, you want to increase your odds of seeing it.
Covering an area of 78,000 square feet, that's as big as 6 Olympic-sized swimming pools. SNO Lab's interconnecting tunnels and chambers look more like a space station or moon base than an underground laboratory. The lab took a total of 18 years to build, at a cost of around $70 million. Neutrinos will give off a fleeting trace of light when they pass through certain substances. This cavern once held 60,000 tons of rock. Now, it houses a 40-foot sphere. The sphere holds 200 gallons of what's known as heavy water, a naturally occurring form of H2O, more sensitive to neutrinos because of its heavier molecular weight.
The neutrino causes a reaction that generates light, which reacts with the photodetectors, so you can figure out its energy and direction and so on.
At this depth, the lab is a tough commute. The elevator descends at 2,100 feet per minute. Then there's a mile-long trek on foot. The ambient temperature is 80 degrees. It's so hot because of the pressure at this depth. All around them, rock is being squeezed at 8,000 pounds per square inch, over 500 times more than the air pressure on the surface. When they opened the lab, they were faced with a challenge: to create a pure environment underground.
We keep these sources of dust and contamination to an absolute minimum by constant effort at cleaning.
On entry, they go through a rigorous decontamination process to remove dust that could ruin the delicate experiments.
Which involves taking off everything that you wore in the mine, having a full shower, and putting on clean room clothes that have never seen the outside mine dust.
Besides dust, people continually shed minute debris of their own. 600,000 skin particles an hour, 100 strands of hair a day, any one of which could compromise the lab's work. Once inside, scientists face yet more cleaning and screening. Even the lab's sewage is clean.
own laboratory waste and our own grey water that come from our showers and our laundry.
Special bacteria reduce the waste organically. It doesn't even smell.
And we do like to think of ourselves as having the deepest flushing toilets in the world.
An amenity the underground explorers at the next level of our journey to the Earth's core would no doubt welcome. Inside the mother of all caves, some 1.6 miles down. These Polish cavers are hoping to go deeper than any cavers have gone before. They're training for a descent into J2, part of the 8,000 feet deep Cheve cave system in Mexico.
What we are searching for is the deepest cave on the world.
Rainwater erosion created J2. The descent involves crevices, sheer drops, and flooded chambers. Getting through this underground assault course won't be easy.
We have to continuously train to achieve that.
The 8,000-foot descent is about as deep as Mount St. Helens is high. So the cavers have to equip themselves like underground mountaineers. Harnesses, ropes, clips, helmets. The Kazprowanitsnia cave in Poland has conditions similar to J2, just not as deep. The training descent begins. As the team goes deeper, heart rate climbs to 140 beats per minute. The cavers regularly burn an incredible 6,000 calories a day, nearly double the daily norm.
We need to provide a lot of food for the caving.
On the actual expedition, each caver will carry more than 60 pounds of food to a base camp, nearly halfway down.
Even if it's exhausting to carry all this heavy food down there to minus 3,500 feet, it's vital. You simply need to fill your belly.
One thing cavers love is being underground. The tighter, the smaller, the better.
For me, it's like a playground. It's playing with friends.
But the actual J2 is no kindergarten. It contains passages so tight, even experienced cavers find them daunting.
I'm small, so I'm not very bad in tight places, but I don't go to the very tight places. I would hate that, I think.
To negotiate crevices, cavers have to muster all their experience and skill.
Because if you fall just 20 centimeters further, you're wedged in this crack.
Which could be fatal, as rescuers could never get this far. The descent continues. The cavers drive themselves on.
You're going deep, and then you're going deeper and deeper, and you have to forget about going out. Just go further.
J2's biggest challenge is water. The cave descends through a series of flooded chambers called sumps.
After 3 days of crawling, jumping, climbing, and descending, you get to the flooded passages full of water, which you have to pass with the diving gear. So then the game starts.
If it rains while they're underground, the team risks getting stranded.
In the last J2 expedition, 2 teams were trapped in this cave.
Yet as the training continues, a return to Mexico is a prospect they still relish.
We were in 6-people team which discovered the entrance, so we feel like this is our cave.
This deep underground, there's air and water, but no sunlight. That's why cavers don't often encounter much life. So scientists searching for clues to the origins of life on Earth have to go even deeper, to the bottom of the sea.
Everywhere that you go at the bottom of the ocean, you have water. That's carrying microbial life.
Off the coast of Vancouver, British Columbia, the submersible Alvin is making a dive.
We think of these studies as our Apollo missions.
Alvin is a 16-ton, 23-foot-long deep-sea mini-submarine. It's taking a crew of 3, 1.6 miles down, on a hunt for microbes spawned by the Earth's interior. The microbes are unlike anything on the surface.
75% at minimum of the genetic content of this life we can't recognize at all.
This is what Alvin is looking for. Hot water venting up from beneath the sea floor that's rich in microbes.
We are starting to understand that they're there, but we don't quite understand exactly how.
The vents can reach temperatures of 750 degrees. They're the product of tectonic plate movement. The Vancouver coast sits on top of the Juan de Fuca plate, one of more than a dozen plates that are constantly on the move. When plate boundaries pull apart, they create giant fissures in the sea floor. Water gets sucked in, heated up underground, then pushed up through the ocean bottom vents in a continual cycle, bringing the microbes with it. Edwards' team has no idea how far into the crust the life extends.
And that's really one of the most astounding things. We don't know where life stops.
To find out, they're inserting sensors known as corks into a 1,250 square mile section of the seabed, an area more than twice the size of the city of Los Angeles. The 8-foot-long corks are packed with temperature and pressure monitors. They're drilled into position up to 1,500 feet beneath the sea floor, a total of 2 miles under the surface. Their job, track the path of the hot water within the Earth's crust.
We have to really understand how water flows, what kind of microbes are down there.
Follow the water, and that's where the microbes will be. The Earth's mineral wealth drives most of the global economy. The rarer the mineral, the deeper the world's miners will go to get it. Tautona, South Africa. Traveling at 52 feet per second, it takes miners an hour to go 2.4 miles to the bottom of the world's deepest mine. Their quest? Gold. Gold is formed from cosmic dust in a similar way to silver, only it's rarer. Less than 200,000 tons has been mined since the dawn of recorded history. Tautona's 12.5-ton yearly output provides half the world's current supply. As the elevator opens, a blast of hot air greets the miners. At this depth, the ambient temperature is a blistering 130 degrees, hotter than a summer day in Death Valley. A massive air conditioning system brings it down to 82 degrees, still hot, but at least bearable. As the 5,600 miners who work here sweat their way through galleries and tunnels, they have to keep one eye on the roof above. This deep, any tremor can set off a mini underground earthquake. The resulting rockfall kills a handful of workers every year. On the next stop on our journey to the Earth's core, we go 3 times deeper than the Tautona miners, to the deepest place ever reached by humans. In the western Pacific, 7 miles down, lies Challenger Deep, a 43-mile-wide gash in the seafloor that stretches 1,580 miles, as far as New York to San Antonio, Texas. And the danger here isn't heat or earth tremors, it's pressure. On January 23, 1960, Swiss oceanographer Jean Piccard and Don Walsh, a U.S. Navy commander, set off in a unique underwater craft to become the first and so far only humans to see the very bottom of the sea. Don Walsh relives the historic trip.
It was the only submersible that drove to the Challenger Deep, and in nearly 50 years, no one has ever gone back.
And for good reason. The pressure 7 miles down is a bone-crushing 8 tons per square inch. Imagine the weight of 48 Boeing 747s bearing down on a fingertip. To withstand this incredible weight, Piccard designed a submersible called the Trieste, 50 feet long, 12 feet in diameter. It weighed 51 tons, about the size of a loaded medium dump truck. For protection, the crew sat in a 6.5-foot diameter steel sphere, weighing 16 tons. There wasn't much legroom.
We had 17 cubic feet for the 2 people, and that's about the same size as a household refrigerator.
which, given that deep water is just 2 degrees above freezing, is not a bad description.
The temperature inside the hull was getting close to that of a household refrigerator also.
For buoyancy, the Trieste was suspended from a float, a sort of underwater balloon. But unlike balloons that go into the sky, the team couldn't use helium, so they opted for something else.
We all know that oil is lighter than water, so Trieste used gasoline.
It took 22,500 gallons of gas to provide buoyancy, enough to fill the tanks of 500 cars. 8 a.m., 0 hour. The descent begins. It's a slow and cautious process. The size and positioning of the Trieste's cabin windows hampers vision.
This is our main viewing window. This is a 7-inch thick piece of acrylic plastic, and then a hatch directly opposite on the other side of the sphere has a smaller window in it. And there's a window in the entrance tube.
At 660 feet, the Trieste plunges into darkness. They've reached the limit of sunlight penetration. But then at 3,000 feet, nature comes to their aid.
The only thing that lit up the abyss was the bioluminescence from animals and plankton who, like fireflies, they carry their own light sources with them. So it's like an upside down snowfall.
Another hour goes by. Then a problem.
There was a great bang at about 20,000 feet.
4 miles underwater, Walsh finds himself running a diagnostic check.
We heard the noise, we checked all our gauges inside, and we seemed to be okay, so we continued with the dive.
But then he spots something.
I looked through the window in the hatch, and I saw then this crack like this on the window.
The crew is an inch away from certain death.
If the inner window had cracked, we would have been instantly dead because the pressure outside at 20,000 feet is about 5 tons per square inch. So it been over instantly, maybe even before we knew it.
But the window is holding. They decide to soldier on. After nearly 5 hours, the Trieste finally approaches the bottom. Walsh sees something incredible.
Just before we landed, we saw a flatfish.
Vertebrate life shouldn't survive at this depth. But the aquanauts are robbed of a chance to investigate further.
As soon as we landed, we stirred up a great cloud of sediment, and it stayed there for 20 minutes.
Silt on the seafloor blinded them.
It's like being in a bowl of milk at that point.
They had no choice.
We weren't going to see anything, couldn't take any pictures, and it wasn't clearing off. We decided to go on back up to the surface.
To enable the Trieste to make the return trip, Walsh controlled its weight by releasing ballast.
We had 2 ballast tubs, which were full of steel pellets, and at the bottom of the tub was an electromagnet.
With the magnet on, the pellets stayed in the tub.
Turn off the electrical power, and out they came.
At the flick of a switch, the Trieste began to rise back to the surface and into history. 7 miles is the cutoff for human exploration. We're now over 1/3 of the way through the Earth's crust. People bow out. Machines take over. All scientists use tools to help them explore places they can't go. Telescopes, microscopes. But geologists face a particular problem.
What's remarkable is that I can't tell you what's 1 foot beneath the ground that we're standing on because I can't see through rock.
The solution seems obvious. Drill down and take a look. But it's an approach fraught with problems. The Kola Peninsula, northwest Russia, 1989. In a wind-blasted spot bordering the Arctic Circle, scientists embark on an ambitious plan.
At huge expense, an incredibly deep hole was drilled deep down, trying to reach the boundary between Earth's crust and mantle.
That's 22 miles down. To reduce friction, they use a new drilling method. Instead of the entire shaft turning, only the drill bit does, heavily lubricated with mud and oil. At 4 miles, the drilling uncovers fossils of ancient plankton, 18 million years old, in a remarkable state of preservation. At 7 miles, they find rock 4.4 billion years old, zircon, the most ancient mineral on the planet. But with every foot, the temperature is rising. At 7.5 miles, it reaches 570 degrees. The drilling suddenly stops.
The temperature increases incredibly rapidly as you go down inside the planet. With deep drill holes, you find that the metal of your drill actually begins to melt.
For the next 14 years, attempts are made to resume drilling. All meet with failure.
We don't have the equipment, the materials that can withstand the temperatures and pressures that exist tens of kilometers down.
The super deep borehole was abandoned in 2003. So if they can't drill, what do geologists do? They use their ears.
We don't see what's inside the planet, we hear what's inside the planet.
Known as seismometers, these scanners monitor the sounds made by rock movement underground. They literally listen to earthquakes.
There's a magnitude 6 earthquake or larger every 3 days on average. It causes the whole globe to shake.
The vibrations change according to rock density, data that geologists can read.
We've been able to actually make three-dimensional pictures of what the entire planet is made of by monitoring thousands of earthquakes with thousands of seismometers over many years.
People across the world depend on the resources that lie beneath our feet. The next stop on our journey to the Earth's core, America's deepest oil field, 7 miles beneath the Gulf of Mexico. When operational, over 6,000 rigs work off the coasts of Texas and Louisiana, with the capacity to supply 25% of America's oil. But it's not easy to get. The oil lies a mile through seawater, then up to 6 miles through rock.
As oil and gas gets harder to find, we're going into deeper and deeper water and deeper drill holes.
A revolution in deep-sea drilling is taking place off the coasts of Egypt, West Africa, Brazil, and the Gulf.
It's really quite amazing that we have the technology to go down this deep.
But technology has its limitations. In the spring of 2010, a rig called Deepwater Horizon is drilling a relatively shallow well, 4.5 miles deep in the Macondo field, some 50 miles off the Louisiana coast. April 20th, at 10 p.m., the rig is rocked by an explosion. The fireball is seen 35 miles away. 11 oil workers are killed, 17 injured. A mile down on the seafloor, the ruptured wellhead discharges up to 60,000 barrels of oil a day. A barrel is 42 gallons. It's like dumping 450 tanker trucks into the sea. The spill totals nearly 5 million barrels. It's America's worst oil disaster. So what had gone wrong? The Deepwater Horizon had already drilled 7 miles to the bottom of the Gulf oil field the previous fall at a different site. Drilling at Macondo was by comparison almost routine. But appearances can be deceptive. The Gulf is one of the toughest places to drill. The coastal shelf drops abruptly more than a mile down into a series of steep ridges and valleys, with canyons and active mud volcanoes up to 500 feet high.
The geology is quite complicated.
The oil beneath this rugged seafloor spans a seam of 35 million-year-old rock, some 800 feet thick. It's trapped under enormous pressure, up to 1,100 times that of the surface.
You have the weight of the overlying rock pressing down on it, which increases the pressures at the bottom of the well tremendously.
Besides pressure, oil drillers can also encounter potentially hazardous pockets of frozen methane gas, known as hydrate.
If you accidentally drill through it, it can be a real problem.
Warmed by drill head friction, the methane bursts through the well, releasing enormous volumes of oil. Many investigators have since pinned the Deepwater Horizon tragedy on a pocket of frozen methane. Conventional scanning technology can't always spot it, and that presents oil exploration with a challenge.
People don't really know how much of it is out there because it's very difficult to image seismically.
Now prospectors are deploying a new generation of ocean bottom sensors to help them detect the frozen gas before it becomes a threat.
We literally throw it off the side of a ship and allow it to sink to the seafloor using this heavy concrete anchor, where it'll sit for several days or maybe even several months.
Unlike standard seismometers, this ocean bottom sensor doesn't measure the sound waves generated by the Earth's tectonic movement. It looks instead for electricity.
We're measuring the electromagnetic properties of the seafloor, the electrical conductivity.
The electricity comes from the Earth's magnetic field. As it encounters radiation from the sun in the upper atmosphere, it generates a worldwide current within the crust that reaches all the way down to the outer core. But its strength is weak.
We're measuring less than a nanovolt on the seafloor. The signals that we're interested in are small.
The current flows through different rocks according to how easily they conduct or resist electricity. By measuring this current, the sensors provide a more detailed picture of what's inside the rock, distinguishing between a good electrical conductor like water and a poor conductor like oil.
Which is nice because if you spend $100 million drilling a well into salt water, it's a bit of a waste of time.
Like oil, methane hydrate is also a poor conductor, but it exists at shallower depths below the seafloor. To find it, you have to give the Earth an electric shock.
That's what this instrument I'm standing behind here is looking to do.
They call her Susie, Scripps Underwater Electric Source Instrument. She uses a 2,000-volt supply with a current up to 500 amps, a mini thunderbolt, 5 million times stronger than the dose needed to kill a human being.
We tow this from a tow cable behind our research ships, very close to the seafloor, feed it power, and it generates electric current, which is injected into the seawater on an antenna.
And then they measure what they get back. A shallow reading that shows the rock is electrically resistive might mean it contains a pocket of hydrate. Only time will tell if electromagnetic scanning will help reduce the risk of blowouts in the world's deep oil fields. But meanwhile, the technique is finding a wider use among Earth scientists at large.
It's like being able to peer into a pot of soup as it's boiling and seeing where everything is going.
And revealing many things about the movement of rock in the Earth's deep interior.
With very high resolution imaging from these seismograms, we're able to actually pick out fine details of what's going on inside the planet, something we never could do 10 or 20 years ago.
We're now almost halfway through the crust, nearly 3 miles deeper than any human has ever seen. It's not a friendly place to be. Here the rock is 900 degrees, hot enough to melt glass. The pressure is 22,000 pounds per square inch, and we're looking for earthquakes. Across the globe, tectonic plates grind and buckle together in continual slow motion, on average an inch a year, about the speed our fingernails grow. Yet at the surface, this movement can have a devastating impact. January 2010, Port-au-Prince, Haiti. A magnitude 7 earthquake rocks the town. The main shock lasts just 10 seconds, but tremors continue for 2 weeks. By then, 230,000 are dead. Nearly 300,000 buildings destroyed. 2 million homeless. It's the 4th deadliest earthquake in history.
Earthquakes have the potential of being the most catastrophic of natural disasters.
In Haiti, the fault line that caused this devastation was only 40 miles long and moved just 6 feet. But still, the tremors unleashed unimaginable forces.
There's a lot of energy stored in the earth as a wave comes up to the surface.
The shock had rippled the ground like a blanket in waves up to 13 feet high.
As it hits the surface, the wave concentrates there, reflects, and comes back, and so you may have a doubling of the intensity of the wave at that location.
This is the University of California's Earthquake Research Center at Berkeley. Here, scientists break things for a living.
These are some of the tested models of the corner columns. And you can see they're pretty badly damaged.
These piles of rubble are the remains of laboratory tests, the fruit of scientific labor to create the perfect earthquake-proof building. Scientists have learned if an earthquake occurs in a place once, it will happen again. It's not a question of if, but when.
In California, we have the bad fortune of having earthquakes fairly frequently, but that makes us want to be prepared for the next one.
The only choice is either move out or build safe.
We need to make ourselves more prepared for an earthquake by better design standards.
During an earthquake, the most dangerous movement is not up and down, but side to side.
Already.
This engineer is working on a design that makes wall panels more resilient to the deadly sideways movement that knocks buildings down.
We created just this type of connection here, so they just transfer lateral load.
These panels are linked by steel plates that take the strain. The plates can break without the entire wall collapsing. The panels themselves are a mix of concrete and steel fiber to make them more flexible, less brittle.
They are designed to be damaged.
The Berkeley team uses a range of hardware to submit new designs to a slow process of destruction. This huge concrete block is 27 feet long and 25 feet high. It weighs 300 tons. Locked up in all that mass is a lot of latent energy. When these 4 massive hydraulic rams kick off the block, they transfer the energy into the structure being tested. In this case, a framework of columns and beams similar to a skyscraper's. No one knows how the structure will respond.
This is the first time we've ever tried to test something like this.
The goal is to push it to its limits.
The building is tilted in one direction, and the beams are rotated against the columns.
The steel is buckled, but the framework has survived. A promising start for this design. But the only way to be sure a structure will hold up during an earthquake is to make one happen. This is a shake table.
The shaking table gives us the ability to do an earthquake on demand.
As their name suggests, shake tables hit full-scale models of buildings with full-scale tremors.
We're able thus to simulate 6 components of motion that the table can rock back and forth or twist or move up and down or sideways to represent what would happen in an earthquake.
The aim is to analyze not why buildings fall down, but why they stay up.
One of the things we want to be able to do is predict when a structure will completely collapse versus only partially collapse.
Earthquakes have killed millions, but the tectonic movement that causes them is also part of a global cycle that's crucial for Earth's planetary health.
Human life would not have evolved had it not been for plate tectonics. Plate tectonics creates land. Without plate tectonics, we'd have one giant ocean at the surface. We wouldn't have any land animals at all.
The cycle of land creation virtually turns the Earth upside down.
This is an ammonite, a fossil that lived at the bottom of the ocean seafloor. What's remarkable about this rock is that it comes from the base of Mount Everest. And the forces involved must have been dramatic, must have been incredible to be able to take this lowly ammonite off the bottom of the seafloor and lift it up to the roof of our planet.
And the source of these forces lies even deeper than the tectonic plates. The next stop on our journey to the core. At about 22 miles down, we enter the mantle, a vast region 1,800 miles deep that comprises 70% of the planet's mass. Here, the race is on between temperature and pressure to decide which will change the rock the most. At 35 miles, the pressure is 16,500 times that at the surface, more than any human could withstand. This high-pressure chamber illustrates the impact such pressure would have on an unprotected human body. Breathing would rapidly become impossible as the lungs collapse and ribs implode. Just 2 miles deeper at 37 miles, the pressure would crush our skulls to powder. But the temperature is also rising, thanks to the release of radioactive energy in the mantle. At 1,800 degrees, it's hot enough to make rock go soft. It begins turning into something called magma.
Magma is what happens when rock reaches its melting temperature and goes from a solid to a liquid state. It can flow great distances across the surface when it is forced to the surface of the Earth.
As it percolates upward, magma mixes with a range of substances that make it even more volatile.
Magma is a fascinating combination of molten rock, dissolved gases like water and carbon dioxide.
Just beneath the surface, the magma collects in gaps and voids in the rock that scientists call chambers. The deepest chamber so far detected is 21 miles beneath Oahu, Hawaii. Most are less than 6 miles down. The chambers slowly fill with magma.
As the pressure builds up underground, magma gets forced towards the surface.
Eventually, a bursting point is reached. The result, volcanic eruption.
One of the most powerful images of the interior of the Earth is those few places where the interior actually comes to the surface, and that's at a volcano.
500 million people worldwide live within close range of a volcano. A single eruption can be catastrophic.
Volcanoes can erase in a moment what has taken, in some cases, tens of millions of years to create. They occur without warning, they are more than 1,000 degrees, and they are nearly unstoppable.
April 2010. The Eiffel volcano in Iceland erupts.
It released 130 million cubic yards of ash, enough ash to fill 40,000 Olympic swimming pools.
An ash cloud 30,000 feet high burst into the air. It spread over 700,000 square miles, greater than the area of Alaska. The eruption triggered a 6-day grounding of airliners across the Northern Hemisphere that stranded more than 1 million passengers a day. It took a month for normal services to resume. On our journey to the center of the Earth, we're now approaching the outer core, a 1,300-mile zone of molten iron sandwiched between the mantle and the solid inner core. To get here, we have trekked through water and rock, battled temperature and pressure, and revealed the underground secrets that shape our lives. But one mystery remains. What makes the Earth magnetic? The Earth's magnetic field stretches 45,000 miles into space. It shields the planet from the full force of the sun's radiation. A single solar flare lasting 2 hours blasts out 10 billion tons of radioactive particles, enough energy to power the United States for 10,000 years, or boil away our atmosphere. Without the magnetic field to deflect them, solar particles would extinguish life on Earth.
We really need the Earth's magnetic field because of the intense violence of our sun.
The field originates in the iron-rich outer core, the next stop on our journey, 1,800 miles down. Here, it's 8,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to overcome the rigid pressure and turn the iron molten. As it moves, the flowing iron somehow generates electricity. Scientists call it the dynamo effect.
The dynamo effect refers to generating magnetic fields out of motion.
But how movements of molten iron far below the surface generates a magnetic field is one of the Earth's great mysteries.
We don't really know how the turbulence in a rotating liquid metal gives rise to a dynamo. It's just this messy, turbulent convecting motion.
This giant sphere may provide answers. It's a mechanical model of the Earth. Part of an experiment at the University of Maryland that aims to find out why the Earth is magnetic. The sphere is 30 feet across. It weighs 23 tons, and it rotates at speeds of up to 80 miles per hour.
We try to get the speeds as high as practical, and thereby attempt to mimic the conditions for a planet.
The outer core is mainly made from the same stuff as the sphere, iron, a good electrical conductor. The inner core is already weakly magnetic. No one knows for sure why. But, like a giant dynamo, the current moving around it creates the magnetic field. Of course, Lathrop cannot replicate the actual conditions in the outer core.
We can't go to the core, so we can't directly see this happening.
But he believes he can come close. To get results, he has to fill the sphere with a liquid, 850 gallons of it. So far, he's only used water. But he plans to use boiling liquid sodium.
The sodium is flammable, so we have to manage fire hazards carefully.
But it's the only thing, apart from molten iron itself, that will do the job.
Sodium has the advantage of it melts at a relatively low temperature and is an excellent conductor compared to liquid iron.
The sphere is the latest in a series of experiments.
We started building hand-sized experiments that went on to basketball size, that went on to, medicine ball size.
This is the biggest yet. But so far, like the Earth's magnetic field itself, how the experiment turns out is anybody's guess.
None of the previous experiments generated their own magnetic fields, but we have all the ingredients of what it would take to get a dynamo.
Nearly 4,000 miles down, we reach the end of our journey. The Earth's core. An iron mass, some 1,500 miles across, with a surface area a little larger than South America. The temperature here is as hot as the surface of the sun, but the weight of the entire planet bearing down on it keeps the iron rigid.
The pressure is so intense. It's more than 3.5 million times the pressure at the surface.
The same convection that helps generate magnetism also pushes heat upward to the surface, in the process cooling the core. As the temperature drops, the core slowly solidifies. One day, there won't be any molten rock left to create a magnetic field. But the sun will have burned out, destroying the Earth long before that day comes. In the meantime, heat from the core helps drive the slow-motion cycling of the mantle that renews the surface, fuels the chemistry of our mineral wealth, and generates the magnetic field that protects us from a hostile universe.
Odds of finding another planet like Earth are incredibly slim.
We've come nearly 4,000 miles and reached journey's end. We've seen tunnels driven through mountains and mines the size of cities. We've come through fire and flood, endured earthquakes, volcanoes, bone-crushing pressure, and discovered Earth's deepest secret. It's what happens. Uns have mapped every corner of the globe. We've explored jungles and deserts, probed space. Yet we've gone only 7 miles below the Earth's surface, just 1/500th of the way to the core. Now we're about to go deeper. We're taking a trip to the heart of our planet to seek out the last frontier. where trees force their way through rock to find water, where strange life forms inhabit deadly environments, where skyscrapers are built on sand, mines are the size of cities, and massive forces continue to shape the Earth. We'll join scientists, engineers, and adventurers as they investigate, explore, and challenge the mysteries that lie below. On a journey to the Earth's core. Getting to the Earth's core requires a 4,000-mile trip through 3 distinct underground layers. The first is the Earth's crust, a fragile surface layer just 20 miles deep.
Imagine that the Earth was a hard-boiled egg. In fact, the continents are about 3 times thinner proportionally than this eggshell, and the ocean crust is about 10 times thinner.
The crust packs a lot into its relatively shallow depth, overlapping zones of coal, water, salt, gold, silver, oil.
The interesting thing for those of us living at the surface of the Earth is that if you don't grow something, you mine it. And so much of our world comes from underground in a variety of ways.
Beneath the crust lies a thicker layer, the mantle, turbulent molten rock, 1,800 miles deep.
Underneath this planet is this intense, roiling region of hot rock, incredible temperatures and pressures.
At over 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the mantle is constantly churning, fracturing the crust above it into giant slabs called tectonic plates.
The plates operate in a way that shapes the land unlike any other planet.
Moving just inches a year, the plates grind together or pull apart with spectacular results.
We have volcanoes erupting at the surface, we have earthquakes, and yet we manage to survive in a very delicate balance.
Incredibly, volcanoes are a source of wealth and fertility, resting place for millions. 6 feet under, it's a common phrase for dead and buried. But where did it come from? Its history can be traced to London in 1665. The city was suffering an epidemic of bubonic plague. At its height, the death toll reached over 7,000 per week.
The Lord Mayor of London tried to stop the spread of infection, and he ordered that graves of plague victims were at least 6 feet underground.
It was believed the dead could infect healthy people, so burying bodies 6 feet under seemed deep enough to contain the disease. Later, people learned that plague actually transmits through the fleas carried by black rats. Ultimately, the 1665 outbreak claimed nearly 72,000 lives, 1 in 6 of London's population. Only when the Great Fire of London, the following year, all but wiped out the rats, was the city spared. But the tradition of how deep a burial should be has now spread around the world. Moving deeper, another small step on our journey to the core. 16 feet down, there is only one creature that can live this far underground. These tunnels are home to the prairie dog, the world's deepest burrowing animal, an animal that has a surprising impact on our ecosystem. Adult prairie dogs are only a foot long and weigh about 3 pounds, but underground, they're literally earth-moving machines.
They'll do it by pushing the dirt with their hands or kicking the dirt with their legs, or the most amusing part also is they'll use their head like a jackhammer.
A burrow can be up to 16 feet deep and over 100 yards long.
That's more than a football field.
They're also incredibly complex. The design incorporates a sophisticated air conditioning system. 2 entrances at different heights create a partial vacuum that pulls in air at the lower entrance and pushes it out the higher.
So that is a very complicated burrow system, and I don't think any other animal has been shown to have a burrow system that complicated.
These little creatures have a surprising importance to other animals.
Many other animals depend on prairie dogs for their survival. For example, these burrows have a significant impact on the way water and nutrients are cycled through the grassland ecosystem. The grass that's there is more nutritious.
Eventually covered some 450 acres, the size of Lower Manhattan. And it hasn't stopped yet. What fuels the fire is anthracite coal, carbon-rich, a slow burner.
If you look at the orientation of the rock, the bedrock, you'll notice that it is dipping in this fashion, indicating that it's trending down into a synclinal valley. And in the anthracite coal region, most of your coals are found in the valley.
Burning at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, the melting point of aluminum, the fire ate away at soil and rock until there were no foundations left. Today, what was once Locust Avenue, Centralia's main street, is just a stretch of rural highway. It's hard to imagine that this was once the center of town.
What we have here is a photograph of what Centralia used to look like, standing on the spot where we are now. We're standing where John Coddington had his gas station, and looking across toward that dead tree there, which is the same tree that's in the picture. And the streets here were packed with houses. There were just, there was one house next to another. Now they're all gone. They're all, the nature is reclaiming it, and there just really isn't, much left of the way the town used to look.
This house on Locust Avenue, across the street from the gas station, belonged to Bob Gadinsky.
In 1977, it was a single house that my wife and I absolutely loved. And it was in a community that was a very close-knit community. But as you can see today, it is nothing more than an overgrown jungle.
As years passed, the fire grew stronger, bolder, scorching the landscape, charring trees, all from below. Besides the heat and smoke, the fire emitted noxious gas, as it still does today.
Carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and sulfur dioxide gas. So it's not advisable to put your mouth right over it, okay, because of the gases that are present.
When the streets began to disintegrate, the federal government stepped in. In 1984, Congress funded a voluntary evacuation. Most of Centralia's citizens moved out, never to return.
There was a lot of capricious.
Grasslands benefit from the prairie dog's presence. Their digging brings air to the soil, and their droppings help fertilize it. In the 1800s, there were 400 million prairie dogs, but farmers saw them as vermin and shot or poisoned them. Today, they number under 100 million. Bad news for the areas where they live.
They're not really part of the grassland ecosystem the way they used to be 200 years ago, because we just don't have sufficient numbers so that they can really be there and have the impact that we need, so that the burrowing owls will come, so that the bison will come and feed there, so the salamanders will know about it. And so in one sense they're not endangered, but the grassland ecosystem, as it should be and as we knew it 150 years ago, is endangered.
The next stop on our journey to the core is 50 feet down. Here, in many places across the world, higher life forms disappear. Soil gives way to rock. We begin to encounter coal. Coal was formed around 300 million years ago. It was a one-time process. The climate was hotter and wetter than today. A giant swampland dominated the Earth's equatorial regions. As fallen trees and vegetation rotted in the boggy soil, overlying sediments compressed it into rock. Today, coal generates a third of the world's electricity. 7 billion tons a year are produced globally. The biggest coal fields lie in China, Russia, and the US. The state of Pennsylvania alone produces 1% of the world's supply. Centralia, Pennsylvania was once a town of 1,500 people.
It was an idyllic small town community. You could walk from one end to the other and know everybody in town, and that's a nice way to live.
Today, it's a ghost town, all because of a freak accident. In 1962, a garbage fire was purposely started in a landfill on the edge of the town's cemetery.
They wanted to clean up the town dump, and they lit the dump on fire, and it spread through an opening in that pit into this labyrinth of deep mines, old abandoned deep coal mines that underlay Centralia.
Reaching a depth of around 50 feet, the fire of...
It's volcanoes that deliver nutrients and fresh material to Earth's surface. So that's where we get nice fresh soils. It's where our mineral resources form, how they form.
1,800 miles down in the outer core, molten iron holds the key to our survival. A planet-wide magnetic field that protects us from solar radiation.
We really need the Earth's magnetic field because of the intense violence of our sun.
Ultimately, we reach the inner core, Earth's most deadly natural environment.
By the time you get to the center of the Earth, the pressure is 3.6 million times that at the surface. It's enough to take one of these granite boulders and squeeze them into half their volume.
Our incredible journey begins only inches beneath our feet. If we peel back the Earth's topmost layer, we find a world of insects, none more widespread than the ant.
This could be a rather large nest.
Ants have built countless nests under the surface of every continent except Antarctica.
You can see that there are ants pouring out the top of it, some of them carrying larvae, it looks like.
Ants have been around 120 million years. They predate dinosaurs like T-Rex. They shared the Earth with Stegosaurus and Triceratops. They outnumber humans 140,000 to 1.
I don't know of another social insect that's as widespread. It's a society that extends over huge portions of the Earth's terrestrial environment.
Ants are fast. Their speed is equivalent to a human running 40 miles per hour. And they're strong. They can lift 20 times their own weight. That's like an adult male lifting a car. But what they do most is build nests, a task that, surprisingly, is crucial to humans. The nests help air and water penetrate the soil, keeping it fresh and fertile. Beneath the ant zone, 6 feet down. London, England. 6 feet below these busy streets lie the veins and arteries that deliver the necessities of modern life. 28,000 miles of gas mains, 19,000 miles of electric cable, 40,000 miles of sewers, and the final